What's up, Campus Life fans? It's Lane here in the Campus Life studios today to bring you another edition of the Guns
Blazin.
podcast, episode number 29. As always, I'm one of your hosts here today, and alongside me for today's episode is Mr. Miller Quinn. Miller, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, ready to talk some ball with you, go over some predictions for the Tech season. We've had some controversial posts, so I'm ready to talk that and kind of speak my piece.
Yeah, it's been a crazy past, 24 hours on our social media pages. We caused quite the uproar with our college football playoff brackets that were posted, but we'll also be discussing some Texas Tech predictions as we head into the season. But first, we just want to thank everyone for tuning in every single week, and we just ask that you make sure to like, follow, share, subscribe to all of our social media platforms wherever you're seeing our content at either the Guns Blazin podcast or Campus Live TTU, and as well as thanking our sponsors for the Guns Blazin podcast. First, with Roof Masters of Lubbock. Fans, with storm season now, or these past couple months having the storm season that we did in the Lubbock area, please make sure to check out Roof Masters of Lubbock if you have any type of roof damages. And we also want to thank our sponsors with JSI Industries, Lone Star Golf Cars, and the Exceptional Community Hospital here in Lubbock. Miller, Texas Tech, their media day is next week, next Tuesday. Practice is just about to start, very, very soon. We had predicted a few things for last episode, but I wanted to do three more predictions as we head into the season this year. And staying kind of on the topic first of our bracket, does Texas Tech earn that first round bye in the college football playoff, and how do they do so if they do earn that bye?
I think they do. They're the clear favorites for the Big 12, and I honestly think we go 12-0. We win the conference again, and we earn that first round bye.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we go 12-0 and win that extra game in the championship. We're sitting there at 13-0, probably with a pretty high margin of victory, I would imagine. Kind of similar to last year, I imagine we're not going to probably jump anyone at 3 or 2 unless this season got really crazy or something and we end up, climbing. But I could definitely see a snag in that last bye like we did last year at that 4 spot. But on the offensive side of the ball, so much talent around,
So much.
everywhere. But Terrence Carter Jr., he's the superstar kind of this offense. Will Terrence Carter Jr. become Texas Tech's first Mackey Award winner this year?
I think he obviously has a real shot. I think
Yeah.
he's probably the second best tight end in the country behind Green out of LSU. What I was looking at it earlier, Sam Levitt obviously transferred into LSU, and he loves his tight ends.
Yeah.
I forgot his name. The ASU tight end last year was the second in touchdowns for tight ends in the Big 12, and that's kind of just going to be a security blanket, especially learning this new offense under Lane Kiffin. So I think it's going to be a real battle between Green and Carter. But on our quarterback side, we have Will Hammond. Kind of stepping into this role, coming off this injury, and I think he's going to have to rely on Terrence Carter a lot, especially early in the season, to get into the motion of everything. So I think we have a real shot.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and we've talked about it on multiple occasions, how, Terrence has talked about his relationship with Will growing over this summer. He said he was really close with Sorsby. Obviously we know he's not with the program anymore, but now we know that, Will is texting Terrence every day like, hey, man, we need to go throw. We need to go do this and that. That's just great to hear. And, I think that kind of like how you said earlier on in this season, even though Will, he has that mobility, we want to see him use all of his weapons and, really get back to that 100% game.
Offense.
Yeah, that game speed, being back to 100%. And, I think Terrence is obviously one of the best security blankets you can have. Your tight end, a good tight end is a quarterback's best friend. You think of all the legendary quarterbacks. Brady had Gronk, Peyton Manning had Dallas Clark. You go down the list, Terrence Carter is that guy for Will Hammond, I think. And I think, Trey Green is an amazing player for LSU. I completely agree. It's going to be neck and neck for them all year. But I think Terrence actually, he ends up edging out Trey and that for that award. But staying on the offensive side of the ball, for the biggest offensive breakout star, this could be, a guy that maybe hasn't been talked about a lot, or maybe just someone that finally is getting their first opportunity. Who is that player for you this year, Miller?
You know this pick because we've talked about it a lot, but I'm going to stick with Micah Hudson.
Yeah.
In a wide receiver room that doesn't really have a clear star. We have a lot of depth. We have a lot of pieces. We're going to have great rotation, but I think this is really going to be Micah's breakout year to take that next step and, kind of be the leader of that group, be that all-star receiver that, we had Virgil last year who would make those great deep plays. I think we'll have Coy Eakin, he's back. Obviously he's going to kind of be that like leader right now, but as far as like taking that next step, those are probably my picks.
Yeah, I completely agree with Micah. I'm gonna go with maybe someone who has kind of gone forgotten in this offense, and I'm gonna go with Quentin Joyner. I think he was supposed to be the starting running back last year. Obviously, Cam and Jacoby had the amazing years they had, and they still are going to have great years. But with Jacoby probably taking less carries in this offense, kind of moving to more of a scat back type of player where you can put him on any position on the field and he's going to potentially break a tackle and go to the end zone. I think Quentin Joyner is that guy. He's going to get a good amount of carries this year, and a lot of people are going to be reminded of why he was such a highly coveted running back out of the portal when we got him. But
yeah, that's a great pick. I know I was kind of between Hudson and Joyner. I really liked him when he was at USC, and was devastated whenever he tore his ACL preseason. We didn't even get to see him play, but that really opened up the opportunity for Williams and Dickey last year. So now I would say we have probably the best running back room in all of college football.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And as we move on to our Lone Star Golf Cars drive of the game, fans, if you're interested in buying a golf cart, if you're in the market to do so, please make sure to go check out LoneStarGolfCars.com or their store at 8507 Urbana Avenue here in Lubbock, Texas. And for this week's drive of the game, for this season, as we shift over to the defensive side, what is your most important defensive group this season for this group as a whole?
I want to say safeties just because I would say that's also our weakest group. And like you said yesterday on the live show, they are unproven. So if they can come out and prove themselves, and that will really round out our defense. We have BJ, blanking on his last name.
Jordan. Yeah.
BJ Jordan, kind of like that leader for them. And if we can have our safeties like really click with the rest of the defense, because I think our defense is so strong.
Yeah.
That is our weakest group. But I think that's also a most important group. Really just to round out the defense.
Yeah, that's a great pick. I almost went with them, but I figured one of us would do it, so I just went ahead and went with our linebackers. They were so important last year, obviously, with Jacob Rodriguez, Ben Roberts, and then John Curry's kind of that hybrid player at linebacker and star. I think they are the most important group on this defense this year with Austin Romaine coming in, Ben Roberts, he's there, and then obviously John Curry, he comes back as well. So I think they kind of set the tone for this defense, and I think that this year, once again, just like last year, I think you can make an argument this is the best linebacker group in the country once again, Miller.
I would agree with you. The addition of Romaine in the portal, coming out of Kansas State, already a conference-proven player. I'm excited to watch him play.
Yeah.
I'm ready for this, so it'll be good to see how they mesh. Obviously, last year with Jacob Rodriguez, Heisman candidate, didn't obviously win, didn't even get accepted to New York, which that's a different story. But, Austin Romaine kind of coming in, trying to not really fill the shoes, but I think that's a great addition for that missing piece you're having. And you've said it, he's probably a better pass rusher than J-Rod was.
Yeah. And as we stay on, the topic of college football, as we move on from our Texas Tech predictions, we'll start off with our overrated teams first. We talked about it last night on our Countdown to Kickoff show, but I guess I'll start with mine first. In the Big 12, I had Utah. SEC had the University of Oklahoma. I had USC for the Big 10, and then SMU for the ACC. There was a good amount of agreement across the board for some of these. I would say probably the most parity was the ACC. There was a lot of different teams and stuff, but Utah, we on ours, kind of the consensus was the Utah teams. It was like Utah and BYU. Those were the ones that had multiple. You had Arizona, though.
I did have Arizona.
So I guess go through the process of why you chose Arizona instead of maybe one of the Utah programs.
Uh, well, I wanted to be different.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
I was like, I
yeah,
might as well change it up a
yeah,
bit. But I think with Noah Fafita coming back, I've seen so many posts and talking about like him being the leader, like the leading quarterback in the Big 12, and I'm not buying it.
yeah,
I've seen him play for the past few seasons. I have eyes. I can make my own decisions. I don't think he's that good, and I mean their schedule isn't favoring him. Last year I believe they were 9-3.
hmm
I think that was just an anomaly of a season for them, and I think they're going back to maybe 7-5, 8-4. They're gonna lose some games that they should win, and I think you're just gonna see Arizona of the old.
yeah. We talked about it last night. I kind of agreed with you there. I think Fafita, good quarterback, but it's funny we were at Big 12 media days and Arizona reps were handing out Fafita for Heisman like brochures and stuff like. Yeah, I'm not buying
Yeah,
the
right.
Heisman talk, and you know, I kind of agree. Was last year sort of an anomaly? I would probably agree so. And they didn't play Texas Tech last year in the
Hmm.
regular season, and they do this year, and it's here in
In
Lubbock.
Lubbock, yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with you there on that Arizona pick. I went with Utah. I know they returned Dampier and Wayshawn Parker at running back and stuff, but they lose basically their whole entire offensive line. Two of them were first round
Hmm.
picks. They lose John Henry Daly on the defensive side, Snowden Smith at corner, and he rotated even at wide receiver some, a two-way guy. And Kyle Whittingham left. He was such a staple for them in that program. I know Morgan Scaley, he's been the defensive coordinator there for almost as long as Whittingham was the coach there. But I'm not the biggest Dampier guy, to be honest,
No.
either. I think great athlete, but he really struggles with accuracy down the field.
Hmm.
I know he was injured some last year, but yeah, give me Utah. I think they do have a pretty easy schedule. They could definitely go 9-3 because of how easy
Hmm.
their schedule is, but I don't buy them like winning this conference or anything.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
Especially when you have the Red Raiders in it.
yeah. And then for the SEC, I went with OU. We also talked about it last night. Me and Miller are not the biggest John Mateer stock buyers, I guess, so to speak. And if you really dive deep into his stats last year, people were talking about, Heisman Trophy candidate, all this stuff, but they really weren't that great when you dove into them. They were led by their defense, and I think this is another year where they're led by their defense again. And they kind of got lucky in some of those wins last year.
Hmm.
You look back at the Alabama game and kind of some fluky like turnovers and
Yep.
stuff that they turned into points. Um, and when they played different teams that the defense couldn't dominate in the game,
Hmm.
you saw them lose in those games. And I think a very tough schedule once again this year. I think OU is just a team that they just don't compete with talent wise with really the upper echelon of the SEC this year. I see them going like 7-5, honestly.
I'd agree. I think I had them at
Yeah,
8-4.
yeah,
I was like, we'll talk about our brackets later, but I was kind of like, do I throw them in there? Kind of for that little fifth SEC spot. I ended up not. We'll talk about that later. But last year with Mateer, people were talking about him being like the second coming of Brady.
yeah,
And he's so good. He's gonna win the Heisman. And then, if he didn't break his hand, I was like, it doesn't matter. Like he was never even in that conversation. It was just this OUPR and everything, money line Mateer. And I was about to say he's doing it against all these non-power four schools, and
yeah,
they're thinking this guy's the real deal. He's not.
yeah. And then, one of those was versus Michigan. And, once again, if you really go back and look at that game, I know Mateer I think he had like a couple rushing touchdowns in that game, but the defense really won that game
Hmm.
for OU. And this year, they have to travel to Ann Arbor
Yeah.
for what should be a much better Michigan team. Speaking of Kyle Whittingham, he's now at Michigan. Bryce Underwood in his second year. They bring in a lot of talent. Including John Henry Daly, who comes in from Utah. He was one of the best edge rushers in the country last year. So I don't even think OU honestly wins that game up in Ann Arbor. I think Michigan gets that revenge on them early in the season. But
I'd agree. Yeah.
yeah, and the Big Ten, USC was quite the consensus.
Yeah.
I think quickly as we talk about them, it's just needing to see it from Lincoln Riley
Hmm.
Miller.
Yeah, that's I mean, I think four of us picked USC. You and I both agreed on
Yeah,
USC, and it's not even really Jaden Mavia that is kind of like our question of concern. It is Lincoln Riley. Like you said, he's been at USC, hasn't really done anything, besides the Caleb Williams year. But even then, they ended up losing their bowl game. So unproven again. So it'll be interesting to see. But the Big Ten is just starting to compete, and people are arguing that it might be the best conference. So we'll see how they can handle themselves in such a dominant conference.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then last for the ACC, I believe it was me and you that had SMU. We talked about it last night. I think Miami is so good in this conference, and I think there's a couple other teams that are just better in the ACC this year than SMU. I look at Louisville. I think they have more talent all across the board than SMU. I think Virginia Tech and James Franklin's first year is a team that can beat an SMU. Kevin Jennings, good quarterback. I just don't think that, they have enough talent around him to go 10-2 and go to the playoffs, Miller.
No, whenever I was looking at that, SMU, they're like the second best betting odds according to Vegas to win the ACC. And like I said, I don't see it, especially when you have these like other teams, Louisville. You've got Georgia Tech getting Mendoza's younger brother transferred in. Last year they were good under Haynes King leading that offense, but I really don't think SMU should be like a top 2 ACC school. They'll probably end up finishing 4th or 5th and have another letdown year.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our overrated talk. Now, what everyone seems to be talking about on our social media page, our playoff brackets. I have mine right here. Miller has his. I think we can just quickly, kind of go over it. We'll discuss, fully in depth later what would need to happen for our scenarios to both work out. But 8-9, I have Oregon versus Ole Miss. I have Ole Miss in there at the 9 seed because I have Trinidad Chambliss winning the Heisman Trophy, and I think that Ole Miss ends up going 10-2. We'll talk about that later. Georgia at the 5 seed, UNLV at the 12 seed, Indiana at the 6 seed, Louisville as the last at-large bid for the Power 4 at 11, Notre Dame at 7, LSU at 10. Then for the top 4 seeds, I have Texas at 1, Ohio State at 2, Miami at 3, and Texas Tech at 4. In that quarterfinal round, I have Texas and Oregon facing off, with Texas advancing, Texas Tech and Georgia. I do think that this would be a much better game than the one we saw versus Oregon last year, because I think this Texas Tech team is just all around going to be better, I think, actually, than last year's team, especially on the offensive side. But I do have Georgia advancing in that game, Miami and Indiana at the 3-6, and Ohio State and Notre Dame and the other 2. And I have Miami and Ohio State advancing. Then I have Texas and Miami advancing. And then what I think could be a classic of a national championship game with Texas and Miami, I have Texas winning by a field goal in the national championship.
That's great picks. Yeah. Looking at yours right now, you and I pretty much have the same teams. There's maybe 3 differences, but I also have Oregon and Ole Miss at the 8-9. I've got Texas at the 5. I don't think they're going to win the SEC. I've got Georgia winning that, but Texas will face, Boise State. They'll be fine.
Yeah.
My 6, I've got Notre Dame, and then my last at large, I've got Tennessee, which kind of controversial. I was going back and forth between Tennessee or OU. I was talking to my buddy that's an OU fan, and he's really high on them this year, and so I kind of trust him in that aspect. He knows ball. I'll give him that. As much as it pains me to admit that, but he does know ball. But I kind of took a flyer in Tennessee. I think they're gonna have a sneaky good year, and finishing 9-3. And then for my 7-10 game, I've got Alabama at the 7 seed, and I've got Indiana at the 10 seed. Moving on to the quarterfinals, I have Ohio State, Oregon, which will probably be the 3rd time they play each other. And he said we'll talk about how all these teams get here, but it'll be the 3rd time they play each other. The 4-5, I've got Miami, Texas, which would be a great – that's your national championship game. I think that'll be a great quarterfinal matchup. I've got Tech at the 3 seed.
Okay.
I think we do make that jump to the 3 seed this year just because of our margin of victory and us going 13-0, winning the Big 12. I do have them facing Notre Dame. I think the Irish actually do upset us there and take it. But like you said, it is a better Tech team. It's a team that has been there. They have that heartbreak of putting up 0 points last
Yeah.
year, but
Yeah.
they don't want to go through that again. But unfortunately, I think Notre Dame, with the talent and everything over there, I really think they're just going to overpower us.
Yeah.
CJ Carr's second year, he's really going to step up, and heard a lot of great things about him this offseason. And then my 2-7 game, I've got the SEC champs, Georgia, taking on Alabama. I think Georgia, honestly, dominates Alabama in this
Yeah.
game. I think Georgia, they just have that next level talent over Alabama. And so for my semifinals, I have Ohio State and Texas. We'll see them play here coming up in the early weeks of the season. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then my other semifinal game, I've got Notre Dame, Georgia. And then my final, I have Ohio State, Georgia, with Ohio State winning by a touchdown.
Yeah, that's I love those picks as well. I think there's a group of 5 teams, and we're similar in this. I think you look at Texas, I think you look at Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, and then I'd probably put Notre Dame as that 5th team. I think those are your 5 best teams overall in the country. And I think it reflects that in the national championship. I actually, surprisingly, I think Notre Dame is actually first with the lowest odds to win the national championships. And CJ Carr is actually the Heisman favorite. Just speaks to, I guess, how much people respect this Notre Dame team. But Notre Dame, they have to travel to Miami this year and play, or they play Miami this year. And they also have to travel to BYU in the middle of the season. Not that Notre Dame can't handle BYU at all, but I think that if that game was like week 1 or 2, I think the Irish would probably demolish BYU. But having that game later in the year, playing up in Provo is not easy at all.
No.
And Notre Dame is so prone to just losing to someone they shouldn't. And BYU is much better than the team. Notre Dame always has a weak schedule.
Yeah, they lost to NIU like last year or 2 seasons ago. That was crazy upset.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, going up to face BYU, that's obviously a tough atmosphere. Like you said, if it was earlier in the season, I think Notre Dame really just runs over BYU. But once BYU kind of like gets into their conference play and everything, and I think that'll be a closer game than most people are expecting. I do want to say something real quick because I've seen a lot of this in the comments with apparently a bias going around because, obviously we're Texas Tech news source. We are, I guess, going to have a bias towards Tech. But if you look at the schedule, and we both had them at 12-0, 13-0 winning the Big 12 championship, obviously they're going to get the first round bye. Like, there's no bias. We did have a couple people, picking Tech to, kind of make a run, upset Texas. We had one of our guys pick Tech to win the Natty, which I'd love it.
Oh, yeah.
Don't really think that's realistic. But as far as Tech earning that first round bye, I don't think there's a bias there at all.
I don't either. And a lot of the comments were talking about last year. I hate when people bring up like they'll be, one of the comments was I think it was talking about Ohio State and maybe Texas or something, and it was like people arguing with each other like, did y'all not see what happened last year or whatever? It's like, man, these are 2 completely different teams, and that's just 2 examples I am just looking at like right now in my paper. There was a plenty more that were bringing up last year. This is a completely new season, and you have to look through it through that lens. And just like you said, Texas Tech, if they go undefeated, especially 13-0, they are going to get a bye.
People don't realize that.
Like they are going to get that 4 seed, probably most likely, maybe even a 3 seed if the teams above them have a loss or something like that. It's going to happen. Like it happened last year, and I know I just said not to think about last year, but when you're talking about conference champions, it's a little bit different. And I think that an undefeated 13-0, we weren't even undefeated last year and still got the 4 seed.
Yeah.
So that's I guess that's our point, is it's not unbiased or biased that we're saying that, when it actually, we have both of them losing in the quarterfinals. We have
it'd be if it was biased, we'd have them making a run,
right? So didn't really understand those comments. I guess it's just people that have low IQ or something. I don't know.
They don't know ball,
Yeah.
I think also, Tech, after with everything that happened this offseason and the past couple years with NIL being such a big deal and us starting to, put more money into all this, I think people are starting to kind of grow some hatred towards Tech, because we weren't really anything special
Yeah.
until this whole NIL era of college football. And then all of a sudden we're out here competing. We're out here winning the Big 12. We're out here getting that first round bye. So I think there's probably some hatred coming our way. And like you said, just low IQs, just some actual
Yeah.
AIs and
Some bots in the comments.
dude,
Yeah.
some of the comments, man, like
Yeah.
I you know what? If you're watching this and you made a comment or something, you go try and put together a
Yeah.
bracket. You go try and figure this out. You go look
Yeah.
at those schedules. It's not as easy as you think. You
No.
can't just go over here and pick teams. I challenge you to do that
Yeah.
and then send it to us so we can.
Yeah. And then we'll put your graphic on our page, and then let's see the type of response you get. So, yeah, we'll come back to our playoff talk here in a second. We're gonna quickly touch on our injury report segment for Texas Tech. Fans, it's time for this week's injury report presented by the Exceptional Community Hospital. And before we hop into the injury report, we just want to take a moment to recognize the Exceptional Community Hospital as a proud sponsor of Campus Live and the Guns Blazin podcast. And be sure to visit their 24/7 state-of-the-art hospital and ER located at 6401 Spur 327 in Lubbock. They accept all insurances and have short ER wait times. And once again, the Exceptional Community Hospital is proud to support this week's injury report on Campus Live. We talked about it last night. Bryce Pollock, a couple weeks ago at Big 12 Media Days, I had briefly spoken with him, and he is completely recovered from his shoulder surgery that he dealt with throughout the spring. Obviously, we hadn't really talked about him much, I guess, in his injury on our show yet. So wanted to quickly, update y'all on that if y'all had not heard the news on that, but huge news for Texas Tech, obviously, Miller.
That's great.
Yeah.
Obviously sat out spring. You said it was kind of just a cleanup on the shoulder. He is probably the best corner in the Big 12. Honestly, probably the best defensive back in the Big 12. And he is that leading figure in not even for like the cornerback room, but all of the defense. We've got Amir Boyd coming back. You said David Martin's coming. He's doing real well. So, for him to be there and, be fully healthy for the start of the season so these guys can kind of lean on him and learn from him, I think that's great for this defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we kind of shift on to our Paving the Way to Victory segment, fans, JSI Services is a proud partner of Campus Live, and be sure to visit their website at jsiservicesllc.com to learn about their asphalt/paving services, earth and dirt works, concrete and gutter paving, crack fill, seal coating, and stripping services. And thank you to JSI Services for their proud support of Campus Live and the Guns Blazin podcast. Coming back to our playoff talk, Miller, we wanted to kind of do more of an explanation of why we have the brackets the way that we do. So for my bracket, for it to need to occur, I'm going to go ahead and get in depth with I guess everyone that, was crapping on our brackets. But for Texas, obviously, to be number one, they would have to be undefeated. I think if they finish undefeated and win the SEC, they don't have to play Georgia in the regular season this year. Texas does have a very tough schedule, but they do get Ohio State at home this year. Oklahoma is a neutral site. They don't play Georgia in the regular season. A&M, they own A&M, sorry. I mean, it's just kind of how it's been. I do think that at Tennessee will be a tough game for them. They do play Ole Miss and LSU. I'd have to recheck their schedule, but I'm pretty sure that's split down the middle, that they get one of those at home as well. And honestly, I think they're just better than both of those teams. I think Georgia is really their only team that stands in their way of them getting to this one seed. And I think that they end up defeating Georgia. Just if you look at rosters across the sport this year, I think up and down, it's hard to argue that they don't have the best roster in the sport. Just every position. I mean, it's crazy. You could just go down the list, pick a position, and they're just loaded, especially this season. I think this is Steve Sarkisian's best team, and that's why they're my number one overall seed, Miller.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I have them as the 5th seed.
Yeah.
I think that I have them losing to Ohio State. I think Ohio State, just is that bigger presence in that. It is down in Austin, so that's what the Longhorns have going for them. But I've got Ohio State as the 1 seed. I think they end up going undefeated with the win against Texas. they also play Oregon.
Hmm.
I think they beat Oregon in the regular season and then turn around face them again in the Big Ten conference championship game, beat them again, and then later in my bracket I've got Oregon coming back to face them for a third time, and I just don't think they're going to do it there. I'm really high on this Ohio State team. That is who I picked to win it all. Julian Sayan's got a year under his belt. He's coming back. Ryan Day, great head coach. Jeremiah Smith, best receiver in the nation, and then you have Bo Jackson, who's coming off of his freshman year. I know our behind the camera Zach, he's
Yeah.
big on Bo Jackson. He has
Yeah.
him winning the Heisman, so I think that Ohio State offense is really special. They got I forgot his name, the 5-star receiver
Oh
freshman.
yeah, Chris Henry Jr.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
That 1-2 punch with him and Jeremiah Smith will be good. Um, a little controversial pick I have here. I've got Tennessee at the 11.
Yeah.
I think they go have a sneaky good season. I've got them finishing 9-3. Texas plays them. I think I could see Tennessee maybe upsetting
Yeah.
Texas. That's a real hard environment to go play at in Knoxville. I'm not sure what time the game is, but if that's a night game in Knoxville, that could be a game, honestly, an SEC game of the season right
Yeah.
there, potential. I've got, speaking about Tech, I've got them at the 3 seed. I think they jump Miami. Miami does play Notre Dame. I don't think they get that win. I think Miami still wins the ACC, but I think with Tech going 13-0 and having such like a large margin of victory over our conference play, I think we do jump Miami into that 3 seed. And then, Georgia at 2, obviously that's who I picked to win the SEC. I do agree, like, their really biggest competition, is Texas, and then I'd even say Ole Miss up there. We have the same 8-9 with the same result, Oregon going past Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss does, I agree with you, finish 10-2. You've got Kwan Lacey and Trinidad Chambliss, running the offense. And, they obviously have a chip on their shoulder with all the Lane Kiffin drama. So I think this is going to be a good season. I'm excited for it. Every day we're getting closer, and I just can't wait for it.
Yeah, it's going to be such a great season, and I think, for my bracket, we're pretty similar, with our top teams. I had Ohio State second. I think their only loss in the regular season actually comes to Texas, and I think they finished 12-1. Just with that Big Ten schedule, they would have wins over Oregon, Indiana, Michigan, and Penn State, and then they would play Indiana in the Big Ten championship and get that extra win. I think that's a bigger resume than what Miami will have at the 3 seed. I do think Miami goes undefeated. I do think that they do defeat Notre Dame and then defeat Louisville in the ACC championship. Texas Tech, I have them at the 4. I think Texas Tech goes undefeated. Our schedule is very, very manageable this year. I think it's much easier than last year. Tech should have no issues at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think they go 13-0 and play BYU in the championship game. For my 5, I have Georgia. I think Georgia sits at 11-1 heading into that SEC championship with the opportunity to move up to that 4 or to that top 4, but they do lose to Texas in that championship game, and I think that actually their other road loss comes to Ole Miss during the season, so that's why they're sitting there at 11-2. For my 6, I have Indiana. They play Ohio State twice. I think even though they host Ohio State, I think Ohio State is just a better team this year, and I think that they end up losing twice to Ohio State. That's why they're sitting at that 6 seed. Notre Dame, 11-1. I think the Irish, they do lose to Miami and just sit at 11-1.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really move up much more because they're not in that conference. And for Oregon, I think that if you do the tiebreakers and everything, I have them at 11-1. But I think that they lose to Ohio State as well, and Indiana, both of them sitting at 11-1. Indiana gets that tiebreaker and has Oregon just sitting there at 11-1. Ole Miss, I have it 10-2 with huge wins over LSU and Georgia. They get that revenge game over Lane Kiffin, and their losses actually come to Texas, and then I do have them losing on the road at Oklahoma, just kind of one of those games they might overlook after having 2 big wins. And then at the 10, I do actually have LSU right behind Ole Miss there. I do think that LSU gets a victory over Alabama, A&M, and Florida, but their 2 losses come to Texas and Ole Miss. Louisville, I have them as the last at-large team. I think they go 11-1 and lose to Ole Miss as well in the regular season, and then end up losing to Miami in the ACC championship, and that's why they're 11-2. And then UNLV, I just have them 13-0 in the Mountain West. But
Yeah, I've got the same. I've got Boise State, winning the Pac-12, the newly defined Pac-12. They're the clear favorites, and I think they're really for such a new conference. Well, it's weird saying new conference for the Pac-12, but it is a new conference. You only have the two remaining schools with Washington State and Oregon State. I think they just run the conference. I think it's going to take a while for some of these teams, that to figure it out. But I think Boise's a good pick at 12. I really like your UNLV pick. I think it's going to be one of them in that final spot.
Yeah, so I guess looking at your bracket for Georgia and Notre Dame and Texas and Ohio State, what made you want to choose both of those, I guess, teams advancing to the championship and then Ohio State being your ultimate winner?
So like we said, Ohio State is going to go down to Texas. Like I said, I have them winning. You have Texas winning. I think either way, Ohio State's, going to figure it out. I think Ryan Day's a better coach than Sarkisian. I honestly, like, morally, I don't think I could have put Texas in the national championship game.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I gave them enough of a run to where they end up in the semifinals. And then Georgia, I think, Marcus Freeman's great coach, Kirby Smart, great coach. They've been there. They have that experience. You return Gunnar Stockton for was it third or fourth year?
Yeah.
He's been there forever. I feel like he's lived in Georgia his whole life pretty much. But Notre Dame, you've got C.J. Carr. A lot of people are high on them. He's the favorite to win the Heisman. Notre Dame right now has the best odds to win the national championship. I just think, this is another close game. I think Georgia does end up winning probably by a touchdown. And then for me, Ohio State is just the clear best team in the country. I think they probably do have the best offense in the country. And that's kind of what led me to my picks.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying there. It's kind of interesting. Like you forget 2 years ago, actually, if your bracket were to play out, it'd be very similar to what it kind of was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Texas and Ohio State were in that semifinal. Georgia and Notre Dame, they'd faced off in the quarterfinal, but Notre Dame ended up making that run to the Natty, and obviously Ohio State ends up winning the championship that year. But kind of a really close bracket, I guess, to 2 years ago, but 100% could happen this year, especially with, I mean, that Notre Dame team that went that year, they had a great defense, but this year's team is, at least in my opinion, way better than that team that went to the national championship.
The offense is so much better, especially with C.J. Carr leading them and everything. I'm looking over at your semifinals, and the only team difference we have is you have Miami, I've got Notre Dame, but we're pretty much agreeing on that semifinals. Our brackets are pretty similar. We have, like I said, 3 different picks. Seating's different, but we have 3 different teams. But go into your semifinals. Like, what made you pick Texas over Georgia and Miami over Ohio State?
Yeah, I just for Miami, that was probably the toughest game for me, is the Miami Ohio State one. Honestly, I did it because I believe that Miami with Darian Mensah, Carson Brett, he was great for them in the playoffs last year, but Darian Mensah, I think, is a massive upgrade, and they return a good amount of their offense. I know they lose, both of their tackles to the NFL draft, but Jackson Cantwell, he was the number 1 tackle in the whole entire country. I know he's a freshman, but he came in the spring. He's been there for almost a year already. I think he's going to be ready. I think this offense with Mark Fletcher Jr. coming back, Malachi Toney coming back, their defenses, their whole entire secondary basically came back. Besides, I think they lost one. Damon Wilson transfers in from Missouri. Texas Tech was really interested in getting him as well. He ends up choosing Miami. And they might have, besides Texas Tech, the best defensive tackle tandem in the whole entire country with Ahmad Moten, and I'm blanking on their other guy. But Miami is, I think, going to be a great team. I think and honestly, selfishly, I didn't want to see like a Texas and Ohio State rematch. They already played once in the season. So figured I might, throw Miami past them. But Ohio State's a great team. And then I just think Texas, like I said earlier, just has the most talent roster-wise of any team in the country this year, as they should. I mean, they're spending $50 million on their roster,
Right.
Um, and honestly, I think if Sarkisian doesn't do it this year, I don't know if he's ever going to do it, with any other roster that he'll have at Texas, to be honest. And I think he feels that pressure this year, and I don't know if that makes him crack. We've seen Texas obviously in big moments before crack. In the past couple of years, they could have easily beat Ohio State in that game at the Cotton Bowl, but they kind of pooped their pants at the end of that game.
I would love it if Texas, just had an absolute blunder of a season, missed the playoffs completely. That'd make me so happy.
Which, obviously they had really high expectations last year, but I think if you look at the rosters and compare them, this year's team is much better than it was last year. And, Cam Coleman coming in, both of their running backs coming in, their offensive line's so much better. Colin Simmons returns on the defense. I just think that they're better than Georgia this year. I think they finally get that. Georgia's been their bugaboo in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
They finally beat them, and when they rematch, I think they've already beat them. They have it in their minds we can beat this team, and they defeat them. And then in the national championship game, I think this would be a classic. Texas, Miami, two of the biggest brands in the history of the sport. I think the game.
Bloods,
Yeah, I think the game would actually be in Miami. So Miami would be hosting a home game for the national championship.
That'd be pretty sick.
I could be wrong. No, actually, it's in Vegas.
It's in Vegas.
Or maybe Atlanta, actually. I think Atlanta.
Yeah. Even then, it's still
it was in Miami last year. I don't know what I'm thinking. They had a home game this past year.
Yeah.
Don't listen to what I just said. No, it's in Atlanta this year. But still, that's close for Miami. Their fans to travel up to that game. But
it really is a neutral site for both. Kind of splits the difference.
But Texas, I just think that they have the most talented roster, and I think you do see Arch Manning make. If you watch him in the last 6 weeks of last year, he was a much better quarterback than the beginning of the year. I think you see him develop into that same quarterback this year more consistently, and I think ultimately Texas just has an overall better team than Miami. Wins a close one though in the national championship.
Yeah. I mean, I would hate for that to happen personally. I would love it if Darren Mensah, he came in. I would agree he's better than Carson Beck. He led a Duke team to win the ACC. If you would have told me at the beginning of last season, you're ACC champion's going to be the Duke Blue Devils. You're talking about the basketball or football? Okay,
yeah.
What's going on here? So I think that's a great transfer, a great get for them because you were kind of missing that piece. They do have Tony, which he could end up being a Heisman finalist if it all goes well. If kind of how our predictions play out with Miami, winning the ACC, I think he could make his way to New York at the end of the season. But I've got that matchup in my quarterfinals. I do also have Texas advancing in what would be a close game.
Yeah, I think too with Miami also, last year they had with Malachi Toney, a decent receiving core, but with Darian Mensah, they also bring in Cooper Bartake from Duke as well. He was their leading receiver, over 1,000 yards last year. So now they kind of have a two-headed monster out there at wide receiver. So Miami, they're definitely going to be talented this year, Miller. But
yeah, I'm excited for it. A lot of great games to play out. I just don't know if I don't know Texas, man. That's just as a Red Raider, I don't want Texas to succeed ever. I think they have some of the worst fans. A bunch of T-shirt fans. You walk into your local Walmart, find a Texas shirt. I'm a Texas fan now. Did you go to Texas? No. Then you're not a Texas fan. Come on now.
Yeah.
So support your school. And if you didn't go to Texas, stop talking about it.
See, that's what doesn't make sense with, the bias comments we were getting. We both had Texas going farther than Tech as an unbiased opinion, and we were still getting called bias. And, hey, I want Texas Tech to win a national championship. We both do more than anyone in the whole world. But, I mean, this is just the prediction, how we see it play out. And this is all preseason. We'll probably tear these in half and throw them in the trash by week 2.
Probably, yeah. I mean, you can't call us biased if we're having Texas going farther than Tech. We don't have Tech even winning the playoff game. Obviously they do get that first round bye because they do win the Big 12. But if we were biased, Texas wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
We don't have A&M here because I think they're overrated. That was who I picked for my overrated team. And Oklahoma. So I don't see it. But use y'all's brains. You know, the
Yeah.
Lord gave y'all a brain. You know, might as well
Yeah.
use it every once in a while. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't really agree with those biased
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah, and thank y'all so much for tuning in to another episode with us. It was a real fun episode talking about just this college football season that is going to be starting here very soon. And that'll kind of wrap things up here in the Campus Live studios today. And thank you, fans, so much for tuning in once again. Make sure you follow, like, share, and subscribe wherever you're seeing our content on Campus Live or the Guns Blazin podcast, as well as thanking all of our sponsors once again for their continued support of Campus Live and the Guns Blazin podcast. And lastly, remember that Campus Live is your one-stop news source for all things Texas Tech and Lubbock. Wreck 'em.
Wreck 'em.